And I spoke a short time ago to the Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister, Ted O'Brien. There's been a big discussion around part of the plan from the Coalition centres on the fact they think we'll need less energy, much less compared to Labor, over the next couple of decades.
I've heard this line from Labor, Tom, through the course of the weekend, from the Treasurer of all people, whose assumption is that with higher energy costs, you will have higher economic growth. I mean, seriously. This is the basis of Labor's criticism of the Coalition's plan. They're not arguing about the fact that their plan is 44% more expensive than ours. Their argument is that with that higher energy costs, they can drive more economic growth. I mean, it just doesn't make sense whatsoever. But if they want to run that line, I'll let them try to explain it.
But the point is around your assumption in the plan you've released is that the country will need 40% less energy compared to the assumption Labor's used. So if your assumption isn't true, if energy use is more, for example, the EV uptake is more, what's your backup plan?
So how the modelling was done by Frontier Economics, Tom, was it used two scenarios based on electricity usage over the years ahead. Both those scenarios came from the market operator. We looked at both those scenarios and we took advice, including from Frontier Economics, to work out which is more realistic. The market operator itself was split between the two, by the way. They basically thought, well, you know, this step change scenario, maybe 43% likely, progressive 42% likely. Now, if you look historically, let's say the last 10 years or so, it's been relatively flat in terms of the demand profile. So how much more electricity has been used over the last 10 years? It's been pretty flat in Australia. We believe that the progressive scenario, which suggests a 60% increase in electricity usage through to 2050, is far more realistic than what Labor is assuming. And if you unpack that, you do go to, you mentioned EVs. We just don't believe that by 2050, about 98% of all new car sales are going to be EVs.
And that may or may not happen. My question is around the backup. So if what you're saying doesn't come true, and you mentioned AEMO, they put a slightly higher chance on more energy being needed. If that's the case, where will the country be under the Coalition? Will we not have enough electricity?
Well, Tom, you might put a hypothetical that actually 98%, you know, what happens if 98% of all vehicle sales by 2050 are EVs? Our view is if you look at the trajectory at the moment of EV sales, that's just not happening. Let's go to another part of what is driving Labor's view of great economic growth. They think that green hydrogen is going to be selling like hotcakes. Despite everything that's happened over the last 2 years with green hydrogen, they are assuming green hydrogen will probably use around about 25% of the electricity that we have today. That's how much is just going to be booming. Nobody in industry agrees with that. And here's the problem. If you accept Labor's pathway and they think they're going to more than double the amount of electricity usage, you overbuild, you overspend. And this is what happens. You start building way too much, way more than's ever needed. Someone's going to have to pay for it. And this is not the only thing that drives their higher costs, but it's a big part of it. So again, the cost difference between Labor's plan and the Coalition plan is 44%.
So your plan has renewable energy at 53%. Now, on current trends, including projects in the pipeline, we could get to that by about 2026. What happens after that point? Would you cap renewable energies, effectively stop more renewables getting into the market?
No one's talking about capping, Tom, but the part of your question that suggested this enormous trajectory for renewables over the years ahead, can I just caution people not to look at what Labor refers to as pipeline? You've got to look at the final investment decisions when basically real money is being committed to. What we've seen under the Labor government is a complete fall in final investment decisions of renewables. That's why renewables have now got far more support from this government through the capacity investment scheme, because final investment decisions fell through the floor. They're not going to achieve their 82% renewables target. They just won't. They need 7 gigawatts installed every single year of new renewable generation. Last year, 1.3 gigawatts.
Yeah. If there's hunger there privately, from the private market to go higher, you won't cap it. So the renewable energy in Australia could go higher. You won't stop it entering the grid.
We're not talking about capping, whether it be nuclear, gas, hydro, renewables. The question that has been put to the coalition, which is fair enough, is how much would your path to a net zero electricity cost compared to Labor's? We now have the answer, $263 billion cheaper. If you were to compare the economics of Labor's plan compared to the coalition's plan beyond 2050, it in fact gets even more favourable towards a plan that has nuclear in it. You know why? Because these assets last at least 80 years. Within that period of time, you have multiple replacements of renewables, remembering renewables only sort of run about a third of the time, so you need 3 times the amount for nuclear. Their lifespan is smaller. So the longer you run your economic model, the better it is when you have nuclear in the mix. But because we replicate it here, what the market operator does, through to 2050 due to its net zero target, that's the way that Frontier Economics did its model. So you could actually see them against each other and fairly compare them. The conclusion was 44% cheaper when you have a balanced energy mix with nuclear.
All right. Let me ask you this finally and briefly. You attacked Labor over what happened to energy prices so far during the term. Under this plan, will anything change? Can you tell Australian voters now, will anything be cheaper in terms of their power bills in the next term if the coalition win?
We'll have more to say about the short term well ahead of the next election, Tom. But
could it only be subsidies?
If I can say, your question is just so spot on though, because 3 years ago, Anthony Albanese looked the Australian people in the eye and promised them a $275 reduction in household bills based on 3 years ago. So if he was to deliver on that, he's talking about $1,000 now. That's the shortfall from what he's promised and what some families are going through. $1,000 more expensive than what Labor promised. Guess when he said he was going to deliver it? 2025. And so in other words, he's got 15 days to stump up with $1,000 reductions in people's power bills.
I don't think anyone's saying that
that's their challenge.
And you've criticised that.
Chris Bowen is.
Just ask you.
Chris Bowen is. Tom, I'm sorry. Chris Bowen, with one of your colleagues, made that very clear.
Sure. Okay.
He did with one. I think it was with Laura, with one of your colleagues.
Okay, fair enough. I'll take you on that. But can I just ask expressly about your plans? Nothing in this does anything for the next term. So is the only way to alleviate power bills in the short term, as in one term, through subsidies?
So our plan in the short term is, number one, you do not close your baseload power stations prematurely. Number two, you pour more gas into the system as you, 3, continue to roll out renewables. Of those 3 points, Labor only has a plan for more renewables. It's suffocating gas and it wants to close the baseload power stations prematurely. That's the difference, and that is why electricity prices will always be cheaper under a coalition.
We'll see the rest of your plan in terms of those prices. Ted O'Brien, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. All the best.